I'm Mark Z, and you're watching Thorin, the best interviewer behind Travis Gafford.
When people discuss North America's historically underwhelming performances internationally, where so rarely have they been relevant in the playoffs of international tournaments like the World Championship or going deep in tournaments like the MSI, it's obvious that an area you can look into is the fact that NA as a region has massively imported talent, that they haven't been able to cultivate many domestic talents, that they haven't been able potentially to put native talents together in one team to actually be a squad that's very, very strong and either just enhanced by a few imports or very strong in their own right using North American players. And being as North American talent is generally downplayed, just dismissed out of hand as like North American talent. What is that? Haha, if Paul Belt is the best mid laner, how shit must all these NA mids be? In light of that, and the fact that you see, despite all that talk about franchising and how when the LCS came, this would allow teams, because they wouldn't have the threat of being relegated, to develop talent and to put people in LCS games and test them out and bring up this native talent. Despite all that good shit that all those owners talked when they wanted to get you to politically back them to have franchising in the LCS, what do we see? Teams are abusing the fuck out of the residency ruling, where the players who've stayed long enough in NA and can now declare their region as NA basically are import talents who are taking the spot that otherwise would be populated by a native NA player, and now they essentially are treated as native NA players. So now you can have essentially, if they're not counted as import, you have two imports plus a guy who used to be an import and was imported for being very talented from another region. So you look at teams like TSM when they had Mithy. You look at 100 Thieves. There's another squad. You look at Team Liquid. You look at Clutch Gaming. I mean, Team Liquid, by the way, are even going to be in a position where Jensen becomes a resident soon. So Jensen and Impact will be residents, and they could get another import in. So why is the trend going to be that they go back, shift the other way like they implied in franchising, and pick up more NA talents and bring more NA talents to the front? No. What people are going to do is get this sweet spot loophole of residency, and they're going to use that as the foundation to build super teams with two imports plus a good resident. And now you're looking at only two NA players in lineups. And God forbid people start making teams where you have like Jensen and Impact and you bring in two imports. Now you might only have one native player. So in light of that, generally, I actually think the approach NA teams take is actually the wrong approach. I think the approach they take is a very short-term approach, trying to just win this split. They're not building cores that can last many years and do well internationally, or that will fit with native talents and make the native talents better players and franchise players. Like, I think generally most teams I've seen go out there and they look for a specific import player, they start negotiating with him, and once they've either signed him or they're getting close to signing him, they then think as an afterthought, right, what native talents can I put with him? So I got an import AD carry and I already have, an import mid laner. So what native support player could I put with him? Personally, bearing in mind at the moment, talented NA players and those who actually might have a trajectory to be good on an international level are so thin on the ground. They, for me, are the rare thing in the LCS. Therefore, I think teams actually should get these players and then start to pick the right import to go around those players and complement them and potentially be a star player or a facilitating player, whatever it might be, because there are a bazillion players you can import, but there are so few domestic players that can actually fill out those roles and be good, especially when we're getting to a top international level. So I think they do it the wrong way around, personally. Then you got to look at the fact that this is somewhat corroborated by the number of NA talents that we've had come up whose original teams didn't keep them, didn't make them the franchise player. And actually, in this scenario I just described, mistook the import player for being the rare thing they had to keep and let the NA talent go, even though they're going to need native talent themselves later. The import might not stay forever anyway, and the import was a short-term solution anyway. You probably aren't going to have that import player, especially some Korean, for like 4 years, are you? So Team Liquid, if you remember, with the team that got us Smoothie, once he was actually a player with some skill, But you know what? You don't remember Smoothie on Team Liquid, do you? No, because he was Cloud9 Smoothie. Now he's TSM Smoothie. Team Liquid didn't keep this guy around. You look at Team Liquid with Dardoch, sure, personality issues up the wazoo, lots of problems. But bearing in mind, they lost every player in the end, and people like Phoenix and Piglet weren't players that you were going to keep or build your whole franchise around. If you could have kept Dardoch and got him to the level he's at now, you have an incredibly valuable piece at the jungle position, and now you're just filling out other spots with top import players as Team Liquid does anyway. You look at Haunter when he went to TSM, sure, he came up in gravity, but he became Haunter when he was on TSM. That's when he became one of the best top laners in NA. And what did they do over on TSM? Oh, don't worry, they kicked him out after one vaguely bad year, took in a complete rookie, they're abusing the residency aspect themselves in that sense. Like, why were they not sticking with Haunter? Like, better to keep Haunter, who isn't really that much of a downgrade over any player you're going to get there, unless you're going to get Impact. No, not Impact. I meant Someday there, or unless you can convince Licorice to come. Instead, why not recruit elsewhere? You can get AD carries that are really strong players as supports. You can get players that are supports that are coming from other regions that are very, very good. Gorilla was available, Core JJ is available. To me, it's bizarre that when they do get NA talents, even the teams that develop them don't seem to acknowledge them, and they certainly don't treat them like a rare commodity like they are, in my opinion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to construct for you 2 super teams. Now, first of all, in case anyone's unaware, I should probably make a video on this topic, but the concept of a super team is not that this team would definitely win every time. You've got it the wrong way. How could someone call it a super team? You'd only be able to call it when the team had broken up and you knew what they'd done, right? Wouldn't be logical. A super team means when these players join the team, they're all strong players from other teams, potentially among the best. And so that's why it's a super team. That's what makes them amazing. Put it this way, the Avengers is a super team, even if the Avengers loses to Thanos, right? They're still a super team. You see the concept. So I'm going to make 2 teams, 2 super teams. I'm going to do it both ways, okay? I'm going to make one that is a real North American super team. These are all NA resident players, but they're not going to include the residents that have been added that previously we import. These are real NA players, and this is if someone did try to make a full 5-man lineup. Then I'll make a team which is the best NA region player, where I can use residents and I can use import players. And the concept I'm going to do there is, it's going to be a lineup that's plausible. Like, these are players who already have played in the NA region or currently play in the NA region. And it's more like if you just had a blank check, all these players were available, and you could pick your 5 players from LCS or LCS history and put that team together. I'll make 2 different teams like that so you can see how I do it. Now, when I make these teams, I'm going to make them so they could be real teams. Yes, I'm going to aim for skilled players, but I'm also going to consider them in the context of who else they'd be playing with. I'm going to try and give a good balance of playing style. I'm going to try and have shot calling elements that don't need shot calling as a result. I'm going to try and have role balance. I'm not going to put 3 players who are all resource heavy carries in all 3 of the lanes. No, I'm going to put a balance between them. As a result, I'm hopefully going to make a team that could actually exist. Because if you look, for example, in the LEC right now, one of the reasons why Misfits, despite having on paper a super team, is a bit underwhelming is now we've seen them play, they seem to lack some kind of shot calling identity. They don't really seem like a team that's incredibly decisive. Then you go and you look at last year's TSM lineup. You could make an argument they ignored style overlap. Did the players make sense? Did the jungler make sense for the bot lane they got? Did the bot lane make sense for who they have in terms of they had somewhat passive mid laner and the top laner someone who's been better when he's been on tanks, right? Did they have the right lineup? I don't think so, even though, again, the lineup on paper looked potentially good. It had potential to work. Finally, as I said before, but I'll point out in another way, I will make the team plausible. Like, I'm not just going to say, right, well, since you can have imports, haha, let's just go and put Rookie and the Shy on this, or, you know what, I'll take Tarzan and Chovy and then add 3 NA players. No, that's ridiculous. Likewise, I'm not just going to say, haha, just get Caps to be in the mid lane. No, he hasn't played in the NA region. He has given no indication he ever will play in the NA region. I'm going to make teams that actually, in theory, could be made in the LCS. So first of all, I'll do my real NA team. And this is the team that you're never going to see because everyone banks on imports. But actually, you'll see when I put this lineup together, this lineup's no joke. And if you wanted a team that you could make your whole branding around, we're the real NA dream team. We're the real NA hope. Like, sell jerseys that are like USA flag, stars and stripes themed. This team could not only be a good team, I even think it could work together. But when you hear this lineup, it would even be amazing to market as an NA team, because I'll go through the players one by one. And what's good is, because I'll start at the top of the map and go position, you won't realise what similarity there is in this lineup until I get towards the end. And then you'll realise this team should exist. It really should. So top lane, right, this one's a pretty easy one. Remember, this is my real NA list, so it has to be an actual NA top laner. So bear in mind, I'm not counting Impact. He's technically a resident, but I consider an import anyway. I don't think those residency rules should exist. I'll probably make a video on that one point. The obvious choice for this position right now is Licorice. There's not really any other real one you'd go with. Like, sure, in terms of experience, you'd go with Hauntzer. In terms of, well, at the moment, like, history of how the top lane's played, it tends to be more about bruisers and tanks. Hauntzer probably historically gets the edge there. But if you look at this team, I'm going to take Licorice because he's got a lot of talent. He potentially could develop even more. He actually showed me something in his first big international tournament in terms of when he went to Worlds. He actually showed a nice performance there. He didn't choke and collapse under pressure. He was obviously very good on carries, but he's been pretty decent on tanks as well when he's had to play them. And when you consider who I end up picking as my mid laner, you can probably guess. I think it's logical to have a player who can be a strong carry threat in this position and has shown the willingness and eagerness to want to play that style. That's another thing. I don't care if you could play carries. Hauntzer generally is going to be at his best when he doesn't. Licorice is at his best when he does. So I'm going to go ahead and take Licorice from Cloud9 as my top laner. I think it's a very strong player right there. I think he's actually one of the only players native to NA who's a top laner who legitimately can go up with the best players in top lane from the other regions, including Europe. Then as jungle, right, there's a bunch of players I can go with on this one because actually jungle talent in NA is no joke. So I'm going to take Xmithie. Now the reason being, right, if you see the lineup I ended up making, I generally want someone who's more of a team jungler. I'm not too worried about super strong mechanics. I'm not too worried about a jungle carry meta. I want someone who's going to service the lanes. I've got my strengths set out once you see the full lineup. This is a guy who has a lot of experience. He's done it a lot. Sure, I myself still wonder if he has his issues at Worlds because he's been part of many of those failures at Worlds. He's never gotten out of groups. But he's someone where I still think he's a quality enough player that if you give him the right team, maybe that's not an issue. Maybe it's not a problem. Now, the two alternatives, most obviously, both actually play for Optic Gaming at the moment. It's obviously Dardoch and Meteos. Now, the problem with those ones is, to me, they are both much more individualistic players. Like, Dardoch, in terms of he is a carry player. Like, he's a guy who is a very gank heavy, will play the carry champions, can be a very strong player. But when you see the lineup I've made, I don't really need that. Like, if anything, that's like a luxury that I don't think would suit us as well. So we're not going to pick him. Meteos is more individual in as much as he seems to be much more someone who takes the initiative himself. Like, he wants to decide what he's going to do. He wants to set up for what he wants to do next. He has the vision for the game. For me, Meteos is Xmithie is someone who's more going to communicate with the lanes and play around what they want and service them in that sense. So I think Meteos is just also isn't quite the right team for him overall. So mid laner, as you might have guessed, I'm going to go with Paul Belter. I don't care what anyone says. He's still a very legit player. In this lineup, I think he would be good enough. Sure, he's not going to be a carry mid laner once you get to the Worlds level. First of all, he can play carries in NA. He's typically obviously going to be best at mages, though. I think he's just a pretty solid player. I know he's had his issues internationally, but he's never been on a team as strong as the one I'm talking about right now. So I think he could be a solid player. And then obviously, despite what I said at the beginning, you do kind of have to look at NA mids, and if you exclude residents, there barely are any. So who's his alternative, right? Stimonte, basically. I haven't seen enough from him. He's not on a good enough team yet, and I have no clue how he'd play internationally. Now, I've seen some promise from him. Like, I liked some of the games I saw where he played Akali, and he wasn't just playing like a Lissandra or Malzahar type bot who they just said, just sit mid and don't die. There's actually some potential here. It's way too early in the game, though. I'm going to take Paul Belter for now, a proven quantity. As my bot lane, you're going to recognize this bot lane, but let's go position by position. So AD carries the most obvious one, right? Obviously, I'm taking Doublelift here. He's arguably the best player in the LCS anyway, and he's definitely a native player. So a multiple-time MVP, if it was up to me. He's won most championships in NA. He's a fabulous player. Despite the fact that at Worlds, he might have choked at a whole bunch of them. Generally, if you look at all international competitions combined, including Season 2, Season 3, and then the odd like IEMs he played, he's overall not someone who chokes every time internationally. And actually, I think if you add together MSI and Worlds, even though Team Liquid didn't play well, he actually had a very high standard of play. And in those games, he was one of the only win conditions they had. Like, he actually looked like he held up his end of the bargain in a bunch of the games, and Team Liquid let him down elsewhere, or were playing much, much better teams and couldn't win, didn't have the playing style to, didn't seem to be coached to be able to beat some of those teams. So I don't really blame him entirely for that, even though I think certainly he has to take the embarrassment and sort of the ire of fans for his poor performances generally and not having made it out of groups at Worlds. The last player I alluded to already, I'm remaking the Rush Hour bot lane. I'm obviously going to pick Aframu, again, MVP of the league, fantastically experienced, a true captain, a shot caller, put him with Xmithy, they're going to have great synergy because I've already seen it happen before. They won 2 LCS titles playing that way. This is someone where I know he hasn't necessarily been in the best form towards the end of last year, but he's someone I always will trust to come out of slumps when he has the right players, to look better, to play in teams where they understand macro concepts. This is a guy who is my general on the field, transmitting what my coach wants to do to the players. And he's someone who can win the respect of these players. People acknowledge he's one of the best players and will listen to a guy. He's not going to have to win them over. They already are going to buy in. Now, my alternatives here, I have some strong alternatives. I could take Smoothie. Problem is, it's 2019. If this is a Smoothie from like a year or two ago, yeah, I might take that player. In fact, with Doublelift, that might make a really strong bot lane, right? But actually with this team, I even like the fact that Aframu might be more of a roamer. That he'll play with Doublelift, but Doublelift understands internationally we're not going to smash every bot lane and then transition out of there. We're going to need some macro, and with good players elsewhere, we can give some of that up to become a very strong team who internationally then we have good players at all these positions. We don't just play through one lane like Team Liquid did in Season 8. So Aframu would be a great pickup there. The other one you could possibly do is Hakuo. My problem there is, first of all, I feel like he's a little bit more limited to the playmaking champions. Secondly, there's the fact that he hasn't been on any really good teams for my money, so I can't really know how good he would be generally. And he's mainly had his play with Apollo. So he's had 180 carry, and I don't know what he'd be like outside of that. I don't know how he'd work with a Doublelift. Does he communicate well? Can he do any shot calling? As a result, I'm going to go ahead and say I'll pick Aframu for this. So basically, I've picked the lineup that won CLG Season 5 Summer Championship, right? The one that beat TSM 3-0, except I've got Licorice as a top lane instead of Darshan, so arguably a big upgrade. Maybe not historically, because Darshan was a very good player, but at this point in time, a much better lineup. So this team, 4 of them would already have played together, would already understand each other. We're already getting Licorice on board. He doesn't seem like someone who has a very divisive personality. If anything, I think people would admire his confidence. And what I like about this lineup, the reason why I actually think that's a lineup that should have stayed together if they could have, is the balance of the roles and the style is so, so good. Because think about it. In this team, Paul Belter, he knows what his job in this team is, and it's not to be a hard carry. Xmithy's not a hard carry jungler. Then we've got someone like Aframu can play make, can shot call. Double's a very strong AD carry who wants to be played through. And Licorice is a guy who, if you put him on carries in the top lane, can absolutely carry the game. So we've got 2 strong carries. We've got 2 nice facilitating supportive elements. And we've got a mid laner who in NA can do whatever you want. But generally, internationally, we're going to put him on a more supportive style or a more supportive champion. I like the balance. I like the shot calling setup. There's existing synergies here, and they're all good players. I think this would actually be a very nice team. Like, it's like I said before when I was setting this one up. This isn't even like because I'm tasked with just picking NA players, I've ended up with a weaker lineup. This lineup could win the LCS if you ask me. This lineup actually, I think, quite frankly, has advantages over any lineup that uses imports. Now, maybe not Team Liquid, the current lineup, or if TSM really abused the import aspect, or you made a team that was literally 3 residents and 2 imports. Yeah, okay, those lineups might get crazier, but I actually think generally this will be a very strong team. It's a shame that this team doesn't exist in the LCS. Now, my other team, which I'll go through a little bit quicker because some of the players won't necessarily be different, although I did try to change a bunch of them, is now we're going to do NA region. So I'm not only including residents, people who were imports but now are counted as NA, but also I can take imports, but I'm taking imports that I've already played in the NA region. So my lineup, again, I think this is a really dangerous lineup. I'm going to take top lane Someday. Now, obviously, I could take Licorice, but I think Someday is a better top laner overall. He's got much more experience, including playing a career and at Worlds, being in the playoffs of Worlds. He's someone where he's very interesting to me as a player. I've always thought he was very underrated in as much as he generally, I know last season, because 100 Thieves was bad at times, he looked at his best on carries. He's actually a player where he can play carries, but generally he is amazing at playing tanks and bruisers, but as a carry. Now, that might sound counterintuitive because the champion and the playing style don't always have to be the same. You can play a champion that is, in theory, a supportive jungler, but you can play it very aggressively. We've seen actually Dardoch did that with Zac, if you remember, back in Season 8. So these are the types, I mean, obviously the debate there is like a farm versus a tank jungler. Like, well, how do you define that? But whatever, you see my point. So Someday for me, what I love about him is I can make him a low econ top, and yet he could still be the best top laner in the region. So I'll go ahead and give you the spoiler. I'm doing that here. So I'm making him my low econ but god tier top laner, and he's going to tank like a motherfucker. Then when I want to, I can occasionally flex in him, be a carry, put him on bruises when the right matchup is right. Licorice just hasn't got the same experience, hasn't played with as many different players, hasn't played with as many different regions. I think it's fair to say that. Impact is still a solid player, but the idea that he's ever going to play carries and be a more flexible player, I think that ship has sailed at this point in time, and people know that if you get Impact, you're getting him to play carries, to tank, to play a stable game, and you're going to put the carries in the other lanes. Then the last person I would even suggest now is Hooney. And personally, I don't think we should be putting Hooney in this lineup, really. Like, he's way too one-dimensional. He skews too much of the game around himself. And because he does both of those things, he is and does both of those things, he's a player where it makes it way too telegraphed to the opponent how to play against him. That's why I think he's even been solved in NA, quite frankly. And I'm interested. I think he would have been solved eventually in EU. He just only stayed for 1 year, and that was a year with a lot of shake-up. That was when we had a lot of different players coming in. The legacy players were dying out, and the newer talents were coming in, still establishing themselves. So I actually think he's somewhat of an overrated player in that sense, even though I still admire him for his carry style. Then you go, and for jungle, I'm going to take Dardoch in this particular team. And the reason why is because in this team, where I've got Sunday's going to play more of a tank style, and I've got strong players in my other lanes who are really strong players, I want Dardoch to be proactive. I want him to gank like a motherfucker. I want him to have actually a little bit of say. Like, there'll be some shot calling in this team, but he's going to have say over how he jungles as well. And he's got such strong lanes that he's going to be able to invade. He's going to be able to tear up the other jungler. He's going to be able to duel them. He's going to be able to put me far ahead in the game with the strong players I've got here. Alternatives, I don't really feel like Meteos wouldn't be a bad choice either in this particular sense. I don't think Xmithy would work in this team as well as he would in the NA lineup that I made. So I haven't personally generally considered him. And in terms of imports, the only one I would really even consider putting in as an actual import is if I could go back in time to like season 5 and get Rosh. I thought that guy at that point in time was a fucking amazing jungler. I genuinely think he was one of the best junglers in the world back then. I know he was in a really bad team, or at least it became really bad when like Zhao was banned, for example, and they were already questionable anyway. They played a little bit one-dimensionally, but I thought he was a very strong player. That's not the Rush that we have at the moment. He's still getting back into competitive. So I personally wouldn't really take any of the imports overall there. Like Rainova's been kind of a bit whack. Obviously, Lyra's been up and down, never been on a top team generally. In terms of my mid laner, I'm switching it up. I'm taking Jensen. Now, here's the interesting detail here. Is Jensen, but remember, obviously I can't make this team in spring. I would have to make this at the earliest in the summer. And yeah, obviously there's contracts that you have to take, pretending I can make any lineup. From this summer onwards, Jensen will be an NA resident. So he's actually a resident player on this list. Like him and Someday aren't my imports. Someday is one of my imports. So I'm taking Jensen because he's a resident. But for a resident, the two best players who are resident mid laners are obviously Jensen and Bjergsen. And at the moment, this is not the time for Bjergsen. Jensen looks like the better player. I actually thought generally he was the better player a couple of years ago, even when C9 was losing to TSM in the finals. I thought just that actually Bjergsen had a better team around him. And yeah, that's about it, really. So I personally think Bjergsen's a little bit too passive at the moment. I think he's lost some of his drive. And actually, I think that whole angle of like him shot calling, I've never thought him shot calling was much of a positive, quite frankly. In fact, I even think if you look at TSM, I think Doublelift had a better influence shot calling and in terms of knowing what he needed on the map than Bjergsen did overall. That's why I think when the two of them combined, they were able to cover some of each other's weaknesses in that respect. So I would personally go with Jensen. He's not going to be my shot caller anyway. This is just to play mid lane. So I'll take Jensen right now. My bot lane, I'm going to take Team Liquid's bot lane. So I'm going to take Doublelift as my AD carry. Even with import possibilities, I don't really think there's a player you want better. Sure, Piglet can match him mechanically, but his attitude is an absolute fucking joke and will tear any team apart. Bang, only just got here, and quite frankly, I think he'd be good in this team, but since I'm going to make Someday play a bit more low econ, I don't really see any point in getting Bang overall. I still don't know how good his English is going to be and if he'll adapt to NA, so Doublelift's the obvious choice. The only real alternative here is Ven, and even though I do think he's been a bit hard done by in TSM, I think it takes more to activate him as an AD carry than it does a player like a Doublelift or maybe even a Piglet. I think he's someone where I've seen him play most of his career with Mithy. With Smoothie, it hasn't been very convincing. I don't really know on this guy whether I'd want him in this particular team right now. Support player, as I alluded to, I'm going to take OllieJ. He's looked fantastic so far. He's got fabulous experience. He's obviously literally won Worlds. He seems like he's quite a vocal player for a Korean import. He has shot calling component as a result. He's playing with Doublelift who knows what he wants from lane anyway. I think this is a really strong individual team. And again, I've balanced it out. My strong carries are obviously going to be my mid and my AD carry, as opposed to my top and my AD carry in the last lineup. I've got a proactive jungler to help out across the map. I've got two people who can have say in shot calling, OllieJ and NateDOhDoubleG. I've got strong carry players who have carried teams even when the rest of their team was whack or having problems. You put them all together. Here's the thing. The ceiling for this team would be higher. Like, they'd be crazier in one-off matches. The difference is the existing synergy in the real NA lineup is better, and it's an NA lineup. Like, have I really solved any problems of NA by making a team that basically is 3 European, well, it's 2 Koreans, a European, so 3 imports, because Jensen's my resident, and then Doublelift and NateDOhDoubleG are almost like outliers for how ridiculously good they are at those particular roles. So I think both these teams will be very strong. You could make both of these teams, contracts notwithstanding. Well, why is that? What, does he not like him? What's Golden Guardian's got to do with anything? Yeah, shut the fuck up. Right? You know what I'm saying there. But one of the sad things about NA is they do seem to constantly go for either on paper rosters that look good or the short-term roster of you import this guy who's still good enough now for a split or two, but he's not going to be your long-term future. And in doing so, you're not trying to find the next NateDOhDoubleG, the next Hortzer, Licorice. You're not trying to find these players, and therefore DeMonte, and therefore you're not going to be able to develop them. And then if you get them, you let them fucking go to other teams. So there's my NA super teams. This video and all of the content on my channel is kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, James Harding, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, Travis Greb, Tristan Jones, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to take part in an esports discussion with yours truly? Would you like teasers for some of my upcoming content, see who the guests are going to be? Do you want to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA? Perhaps you'd like to suggest a guest you'd like to see in my content or a topic to discuss. Well, if so, then put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.